Right. Welcome to my talk. So I'm gonna talk about evolution of GraphQL. How is it all started? What do we do now? What we have already accomplished? Some of the future plans and some of the long-term future plans. Also, I'm gonna talk about best practices that we start to introduce in the GraphQL. GraphQL Server and schema governance. Should be very interesting. All right, let's begin. So why GraphQL and why Magento likes GraphQL? As you know, many types in Magento can have dozens of fields. For example, product interface may have hundreds of fields. And not all of the clients need all of those fields. For example, Luma product list need only 3 fields: image, title, and price. And getting all of this data from the server is kind of expensive because you transfer more data over the wire, but more importantly, you need to load this data from the database on the server side. And loading some of those fields is expensive. For example, media gallery categories, custom attributes. To load those fields, you will have to do queries to separate tables, and it decreases performance. And GraphQL solves exactly that problem. It allows clients to control what is going to be loaded on the server side. And at Magento, we don't control clients. Many developers build their own clients, and we don't know how the API is being used. So this is why GraphQL is a very good fit for Magento. Now let's take a look how is it all started. So it started by a team of 3 engineers. We completed catalog coverage. Then many of you guys joined to help us build APIs. After that, we completed customer coverage and caching, started working on commerce coverage. Relatively recently, we completed most of the open source coverage and started working on B2B. Where we are now, we almost at 98% completion of B2C coverage, which is open source and commerce. All of this work is in GitHub, but not everything has been released yet. We plan to complete B2C coverage in 2021, and we made very good progress on the B2B with the help of our partners. So we're about 70% complete on the B2B coverage, and expect to finish that in 2021. Now let's take a look what is new in GraphQL. And here on this list might be some items that appear that we added into the 3.5, so it's kind of newish. I'm going to highlight the most important things. In cart, we added new add to cart mutations that I'm going to talk about in more details on the next slides. We added store pickup for the checkout. We added ability to query associated products. We redesigned prices, added ability to query multiple categories, added staging in preview, added reorder functionality, ability to use payment methods, reset password, and added ability to query purchase downloadable products. And of course, it would not be possible without many partners and developers who help us build this coverage. On this slide, I wanted to highlight some of the partners who help us. And these are just some of the partners. It's very hard to actually find the list of all of the partners, and I did my best here. So I apologize if I missed you. So I mentioned that we added new add to cart mutation, and it's this is what we had before 2.4.1. There were specific mutation for every product type, and that mutation would require its own input and have its own output. So we recognize that it might be a little too complicated for developers, and we redesigned it. We introduced a new mutation that allows to add all of the product types. It has a unified input. You can add simple products, configurable products, bundled products through the same mutation. You can specify custom options. It's kind of hard to explain everything about this query on a couple of slides. So there is a link in the bottom right corner to the documentation. I suggest to check out this new query and let us know what do you guys think. Again, it's become available in 2.4.1. What is coming? So as I mentioned, B2C coverage is almost complete, but there are still some good things in progress. For example, login as customer, new configurable options query, which I will talk about more later. Reward points, returns, multiple wish lists, and B2B coverage, which we already implemented most of the B2B coverage, and it is available on the GitHub. It just has not been released yet. So if you're a partner and curious what we are doing on the B2B, please take a look at B2B repository and let us know what do you think. It is very important for us because we want to make sure that it is convenient. So now let's talk about this new query for configurable options. Here's the old query, and if you use it, well, if you never use it, let me tell you about it, how it works. So there is a configurable options field, and it allows you to get all of the configurable options and values, and also variants. And variants represent the actual selections that you make when you select option. For example, if you have a shirt in the size M and S in the color blue, then there would be two variants that would represent those selection. And we recognize that there might be a problem with this query on the large sets of data. If merchant has hundreds of thousands variations, then the query becomes too slow because all of those variations needs to be loaded on the front end. Then on the front end, when user makes selection, you need to map option values to those variants to understand which one is being selected. And we redesigned this query. We are going to introduce a new query that and also should be easier to understand and use for developers. So this new query, it also allows to load all of the options and values, but you don't have permutations here. So for every option, you'll just have values, and there is ability to pass and filter out what is available for selection. For example, if there is a short that has attributes color and size, and user select a size, you can pass a size into this query, and it will show you the remaining sizes that user can select and remaining colors. And when you pass all of the values that user selected, you will get a variant, which is your selection. There are some additional fields here that are not displayed on the slide. For example, there would be a media gallery. So when user selects an attribute, you can receive images that are relevant for that selection. Or there are swatches that can be used to draw the options for the user. If you don't supply any options, you will get all of the options and their values. And take a look at the proposal in architecture repository that we actually accepted this week, and let us know what do you think. The link is at the bottom right corner. Let's talk about some of the best practices we are introducing in our coverage. So you probably notice that not all of the fields, not all of the types have identifier field, and among those types that have, the type of this identifier field is not very consistent. We recognize that this is a problem for some clients because it's hard to create unified caching strategy of on the client side. It's hard to merge existing data with the new data when type doesn't have identifier field. So we unifying this, we are introducing a new field UID of a type ID on all of the types. And this should improve caching and developer experience. Error handling, very, very important. It's not very convenient to parse standard GraphQL errors, and sometimes developer doesn't know what kind of errors there can be, and if all of those errors can be displayed to the user, especially if the developer not familiar with Magento. So what we are doing with errors, we are going to introduce new field user errors, which will contain errors that can be displayed to the user, and there would be a default message that can be displayed to the user, and there would be also type of the error, which can be used to create custom error messages. And it is very convenient for developers to have those types, because you can tell from the schema what kind of errors you can get, and build your client to account for those errors and display it to the user. So it should improve developer and user experience greatly. Another important best practice that we started to introduce in the new queries, and we are coming back and improving some of the old queries, is making sure that in the mutations we return a type on which you can query fields that have been modified. And why is it important? It's very often in clients want to update entities that they just modified, or it could be even a list of entities. If you, let's say, add in a new item or deleting an item, you probably want to update the list. Or if you're modifying a single entity, you probably want to update the presentation of that entity on the UI. So previously we have been returning just a Boolean field so the client can tell if operation was successful. Now we are adding ability to query that object that has been modified, or query the list of objects. So the clients would not have to make a new request to the backend to load the data that is needed to update front end. So this should improve developer experience and also performance, because there would be no need in a second query to the backend. A lot more convenient. This is not new, but the reason I want to talk about caching is GraphQL is because I've seen that not all of the extensions that add their own queries leverage caching mechanism that we have in Magento. You can cache your GET requests, and it would help improve query response time. For example, you can decrease response time from 400, 500 milliseconds to 40 milliseconds. Big difference. And we have a documentation that describe how you can cache your GET request and enable tagging and caching validation. On Magento Cloud, we use Fastly. Fastly has globally distributed edges, which allows to make sure that your clients or customers always will have the same latency regardless of where they are located. You can also use Fastly for only with your own installations, and if you want something simpler, you can use Varnish as well. So check out the documentation if you add custom GraphQL queries in your extensions. Make sure that you use caching. I think this is all about best practices, and I want to talk about a GraphQL Server. This is something that we're currently working on, and we expect to have early access program sometime in 2021. So let's take a look what it is. And by now, you probably heard many times that Magento architecture is going in the direction of services. And the reason for that is that we want to improve performance. We want to make upgrades more granular and hopefully less expensive. It would also allow to make architecture more cloud native, which should improve scalability. And the way we're moving into that direction is we are introducing Storefront Services. Storefront Services are responsible for storefront scenarios that allow to query data that is needed on the storefront. And these services will contain very thin application layer, and they would utilize purposely built databases. Data will be denormalized, and everything will be optimized for queries. Those services will be behind GraphQL Server, because on the front end we use GraphQL. So GraphQL will be query those services to get the data, and we are going to have message workers that would asynchronously synchronize data between Magento and the services. Now, as you understand, when you understand how GraphQL Server fits into this architecture, let's take a look more closely at what GraphQL Server is. So GraphQL Server is it's basically a proxy that allows to forward GraphQL requests to Storefront services. And in this example, I have a query that requests category data and CMS page content. And we have a catalog storefront service, and we have Magento. We don't have CMS storefront service yet. So the way our GraphQL server would be able to handle those kind of requests, it would allow to query that comes from storefront services and from Magento through the same endpoint. So GraphQL will be compatible for the clients. The transition would be seamless, and this GraphQL server would be able to forward requests that has storefront services. Like if there is a query that implemented by storefront service, it would forward that request to a storefront service. If we don't have storefront service yet that implements that query, we would forward that request to Magento. In case of storefront services, we would use very efficient gRPC protocol. In case of Magento, it would be less efficient. And the query on the right side, normally it wouldn't make sense because the performance of that query would be equal to the performance of the slowest query. And in that case, it would be a query to Magento. So normally it would be split, but the point I wanted to illustrate that this server would be able to handle requests that go to Storefront Services and to Magento. For the client, it would not be any difference. The schema would be 100% compatible. If you know, if you want to learn more about GraphQL servers, join community hangouts, pay attention to those. We try to do a presentation on what's going on with Storefront Services and GraphQL Server on those hangouts every month. And the last thing I want to talk about is a new process for GraphQL schema governance. Now, many of you probably contributed to architecture repository, or at least looked what is inside. And you know that there are many things: proposals, technical visions, ideas, and of course, GraphQL schemas. And we recognize that it's a little too hard for people that may not be familiar with Magento to find GraphQL schemas and this repository, and also to understand those schemas, because they are not in the generic format. They contain specific details that are relevant only to Magento, and some other syntax. So what we are doing, we want to move those schemas into a separate repository, make sure that the schemas are in generic format. And this would allow us to have better process and better visibility around what is happening with those schemas. It would help us to make sure that internally our different services use the same schemas, and it would also allow to produce better schemas, because we would be able to do static analysis and perform backwards compatibility validation before we accept those schemas and start implementing. So it should be also easier for you to contribute, because you wouldn't have to wait for the person to take a look at the schema and highlight if it follows best practices or coding standards. You would be able to receive that feedback from the build. And people who are not very familiar with Magento also would be able to understand and contribute to schema, because they would be in generic format. I think this is it. So now it's time to Q&A.
Yeah, they are, but I will try to questions I will ask. Is exist as risk for buildable?
For some reasons, it's very hard for me to hear you. You are breaking up.
Okay.
Okay, I see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better now.
So yeah, you can read the chat and answer the questions.
Okay, I will start from the bottom. So I see a question about which technology new generic schema will be based. It will just use standard GraphQL syntax. Schemas would not contain implementation details, and it would be just plain GraphQL. The idea is that we will define those schemas, and in Magento we would not use those schemas like one-to-one. In Magento we will still have the same syntax. So nothing is changing on Magento side. So we will just take the schema and add Magento specific details in Magento. Okay. So does this repository already exist? This repository does not exist yet. We already created repository internally, and now we are trying to make this repo public. And then we will have to take existing GraphQL schema from Magento, put in the repository. And after that, we will be able to apply proposals from architecture repository as Delta on top, and make sure that everything that has not been implemented yet follows the best practices that we want to have. Okay. I see there is another question from Simon, and it sounds like Chris already answered that. Okay, let me scroll down. Okay, no more questions. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, great, guys. Please don't hesitate. If you have any, post them in chat. We'll answer them. Also, I want to remind you that the presentation itself will be, the recording of this presentation will be available afterwards on YouTube, so you can rewatch it. If you still have some questions, or you will have questions later on, you can reach out to Igor in community engineering Slack. I think that's the best place. And also you can chat in chat rooms after the event, so you can have deep conversations about any topic that you want to discuss. Okay, with that, Igor, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you, the audience, for the active participation and for your attention. And I think we have now around 10 minutes for the break, and we'll meet you on following sessions. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.